The morning Frederick Ashford, Duke of Ravenscourt, received the letter from his solicitor. He had been standing in his study with a glass of untouched brandy, staring at the portrait of his late father. The old Duke had been a man of tradition, unwavering in his belief that duty superseded all personal inclination. Frederick had spent the better part of his adult life attempting to honor that legacy while quietly rebelling against its suffocating constraints. The letter changed everything, or rather, it threatened to. His uncle, the Earl of Westmarch, had taken it upon himself to arrange a marriage for Frederick. The audacity alone would have been enough to ignite his temper, but what truly infuriated him was the presumption that he, at 32 years of age and in full possession of his faculties, required intervention in matters of the heart. He had no intention of marrying for alliance, for land, or for the preservation of bloodlines that meant nothing without genuine affection to sustain them. Love, Frederick had long believed, was a luxury afforded only to those willing to risk everything. And risk was something he had learned to avoid with calculated precision. He crumpled the letter and threw it into the fire, watching the parchment curl and blacken. The solicitor's careful script dissolved into ash, but the problem itself remained stubbornly alive. His uncle would not relent easily, and the woman in question, Miss Emmeline Thorne, was reportedly of good family, reasonable fortune, and entirely suitable by every measure that mattered to society. What his uncle did not know, what no one could possibly know, was that Frederick had already met Emmeline Thorne. He had met her 2 years prior at a garden party, hosted by mutual acquaintances, and in the span of a single afternoon, she had managed to upend every carefully constructed defense he possessed. She had been standing beneath a pergola draped in wisteria, engaged in animated conversation with an elderly gentleman about agricultural reform. Frederick had approached intending to make polite conversation, only to find himself drawn into a debate that challenged every assumption he held about land management and tenant welfare. Emmeline had not deferred to his title, had not softened her opinions to suit his station, and had certainly not shown any indication that she found him remotely impressive. It had been the most exhilarating conversation of his life. He had left that garden party with her image burned into his memory, the way her eyes lit with fierce intelligence, the set of her jaw when she refused to concede a point, the unexpected softness in her smile when she finally acknowledged his perspective had merit. He had thought of her often in the months that followed, always with the quiet resignation that someone like Emmeline Thorne would never settle for someone like him, a man too proud, too cautious, too afraid to offer anything beyond the cold comfort of his title. Now, through the machinations of his meddling uncle, fate had thrust her back into his path, and Frederick's first instinct was to refuse. He penned his response that very evening, his handwriting sharp and decisive across the page. He would not be party to an arranged marriage regardless of the bride's identity. He would not reduce a union to a transaction, no matter how beneficial it might appear on paper. His uncle could consider the matter closed. The reply came swiftly, and with it an unexpected complication. Emmeline Thorne had also refused the arrangement. Frederick read the brief note from his solicitor 3 times, each reading bringing a fresh wave of conflicting emotions. Relief that she shared his aversion to arranged unions, disappointment that she had dismissed the possibility so readily. And beneath it all, a flicker of something he refused to name, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The situation might have ended there, 2 stubborn individuals united in their mutual rejection, if not for the intervention of circumstance. 3 weeks after the initial proposal, Frederick found himself obligated to attend a country house party at Thornfield Manor, the estate of Lord and Lady Pemberton. The invitation had been extended months prior, and declining at this late stage would constitute a significant social insult. He arrived on a grey afternoon in late April, the sky heavy with unshed rain, his mood matching the weather. The manor itself was impressive, a sprawling Tudor structure with manicured gardens that stretched toward distant woods. Guests milled about the entrance hall as footmen carried trunks and hat boxes up the grand staircase. Frederick was greeting his hosts when he saw her. Emmeline stood near the drawing-room entrance, engaged in conversation with another young woman. She wore a dress of deep green that brought out the auburn tones in her dark hair, and her posture conveyed the same quiet confidence he remembered. When she laughed at something her companion said, the sound carried across the hall, genuine and unrestrained in a way that made his chest tighten. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and recognition flashed in her expression. For a moment, neither moved. Then Emmeline inclined her head in polite acknowledgement, before deliberately turning her attention back to her companion. The dismissal was clear. She had no interest in engaging with him, arranged marriage or otherwise. Frederick spent the remainder of the afternoon in a state of barely concealed frustration. Dinner that evening was an exercise in restraint, as he found himself seated several places away from Emmeline, close enough to hear fragments of her conversation, but too distant to participate. She spoke with animation about a recent lecture on natural philosophy, her enthusiasm drawing others into the discussion, despite the unconventional nature of the topic. After dinner, the guests gathered in the music room where Lady Pemberton had arranged for entertainment. Emmeline was persuaded to play the pianoforte, and she did so with technical skill but without particular passion, as though performing an obligation rather than sharing something meaningful. Frederick noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she finished, and accepted the polite applause. It was only later, when most of the guests had retired for the evening and Frederick found himself walking through the Manor's library, that he encountered her again. She was curled in a window seat, a book open in her lap, the light from a nearby lamp casting shadows across her face. "I had not taken you for someone who flees social gatherings, Miss Thorne," he said, surprising himself with the directness of his address. She looked up, and for a moment, wariness flickered in her expression. Then she closed the book with deliberate calm. "And I had not taken you for someone who makes assumptions about people you barely know, Your Grace." The formality of her tone stung more than it should have. "We have met before." "Yes, 2 years ago. You spent 20 minutes explaining why tenant farmers lack the education necessary to implement modern agricultural techniques, and I spent 20 minutes explaining why patronizing condescension masquerading as concern is precisely why reform efforts fail." She set the book aside. It was a memorable conversation. Frederick felt heat rise to his face. "I was not patronizing. You were insufferable." But there was no real venom in her words, only a tired honesty that somehow made them worse. "Though I suspect you've been told as much before and simply chose not to listen." He should have been offended, should have responded with the cold dignity that his title afforded him. Instead, he found himself laughing, a short, startled sound that seemed to surprise them both. "You are remarkably frank, Miss Thorne. I see no point in being otherwise." She studied him for a moment, her gaze searching. "You refused the arrangement as well. Why?" The question caught him off guard. He moved closer to the window seat, though he did not presume to sit without invitation. "I do not believe marriage should be a matter of convenience." How noble! The faint irony in her tone made it clear she suspected there was more to the story. "And you?" he countered. "What prompted your refusal?" Emmeline was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the embossed title on the book's cover. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, but no less certain. "I have no intention of becoming an ornament in someone's life, Your Grace. I am not a prize to be won, or a burden to be borne. Any man who would agree to marry me without knowing me, without caring to know me, is not someone I could ever respect, much less love." The words struck something deep within him, resonating with truths he had never quite articulated, even to himself. Here was someone who understood the fundamental problem with arranged marriages, who recognized that genuine partnership required more than compatible fortunes and agreeable bloodlines. "That is remarkably sensible," he said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "You sound surprised." "I am unaccustomed to hearing such clarity from anyone, let alone from someone our respective families deemed suitable for an arranged union." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Perhaps that is precisely why they thought we would suit. We are both apparently too stubborn to be managed by conventional means." The observation hung between them, carrying unexpected weight. Frederick found himself truly looking at her for the first time since entering the library, not as the woman his uncle had chosen, not as the abstract ideal he had built in his memory, but as the person sitting before him, complex and guarded and entirely herself. "May I sit?" he asked. Emmeline hesitated, then gestured to the opposite end of the window seat. He settled into the space, maintaining a respectful distance, acutely aware of the impropriety of their unchaperoned conversation and entirely unable to bring himself to care. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding toward the abandoned book. "Adam Smith, The Theory of Moral Sentiments." She picked it up again, running her fingers along the spine. "I am attempting to reconcile his views on sympathy with recent developments in social reform. It is proving more challenging than anticipated." Frederick blinked. Most young women of his acquaintance read novels or poetry, light entertainments designed to fill idle hours. Emmeline Thorne was reading economic philosophy and grappling with its practical applications. "And what have you concluded thus far?" he asked, genuinely curious. She looked at him with something that might have been surprise or might have been suspicion. "You truly wish to know? I would not have asked otherwise." What followed was not the stilted, superficial exchange that characterized most social interactions. Instead, they fell into genuine discourse, debating the intersection of moral philosophy and practical governance, challenging each other's assumptions without descending into argument. Emmeline defended her positions with passionate intelligence, and Frederick found himself pushed to articulate thoughts he had never fully examined. Time became irrelevant. The library grew darker as the lamp burned lower, and still they talked, moving from philosophy to politics to literature with fluid ease. At some point, Frederick realized he had been laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in recent memory. Emmeline's wit was sharp, but never cruel, her observations insightful without being pedantic. It was nearly midnight when the sound of approaching footsteps prompted them both to awareness. Emmeline stood quickly, smoothing her dress with practiced efficiency. "I should return to my rooms," she said, though she made no immediate move toward the door. Frederick rose as well, reluctant for the evening to end, but knowing propriety demanded it. "Miss Thorne, I wonder if I might speak with you again tomorrow. Perhaps a walk in the gardens, properly chaperoned, of course." She studied him for a long moment, and he could see the internal debate playing across her features. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, Your Grace, but I make no promises beyond conversation. That is all I ask." She left then, taking the book with her, and Frederick remained in the darkened library, his mind whirling with possibilities he had thought long dead. He had intended to refuse the arranged marriage on principle, to maintain his independence from his uncle's machinations. But now, standing in the space Emmeline had occupied, breathing air that still carried the faint scent of lavender, he found his certainty wavering. This was not about duty or obligation. This was something else entirely, something that terrified him precisely because it felt like the beginning of exactly what he had spent years trying to avoid. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the threatened rain having passed in the night. Frederick took particular care with his appearance, then immediately chastised himself for doing so. This was merely a walk, a continuation of their conversation from the previous evening. Nothing more. He found Emmeline in the morning room, taking tea with several other guests. She wore a walking dress of soft blue, her hair arranged simply, and when she saw him enter, her expression remained carefully neutral. "Your Grace," she greeted him formally, "I trust you slept well." "Tolerably," he replied, aware that several pairs of eyes were watching their exchange with interest. "I was hoping you might join me for that walk we discussed." A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed her face. "I would be delighted. Lady Pemberton has already offered to accompany us as propriety demands." Their hostess, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a reputation for discretion, rose from her seat. "Indeed, the gardens are particularly lovely this time of year. Shall we?" They made their way outside, Lady Pemberton maintaining a respectful distance that allowed for private conversation while still serving as chaperone. The gardens were indeed spectacular, spring flowers in full bloom, pathways winding through carefully tended beds. For several minutes they walked in silence. Frederick found himself acutely aware of Emmeline's presence beside him, the way she moved with unconscious grace, the slight furrow between her brows that suggested deep thought. "You are very quiet this morning, Your Grace," she finally said. "Having second thoughts about subjecting yourself to further conversation?" "On the contrary, I am attempting to determine where to begin." He paused beside a fountain, watching water cascade over stone. "Miss Thorne, I must be honest with you about something." She turned to face him fully, wariness returning to her expression. "That sounds ominous. When my uncle first proposed the arranged marriage, I refused immediately, not because I found the idea of marrying you objectionable, but because I oppose arranged marriages on principle." He forced himself to meet her eyes. "What I did not tell anyone, what I could not tell anyone, was that I had already met you, 2 years ago at that garden party, and I have not forgotten that meeting." Emmeline's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for him to pass. "I see. And you expect me to be flattered by this revelation?" "No. I expect you to understand that my refusal was not a rejection of you specifically, but of a system that treats marriage as a transaction rather than a partnership between equals." He drew a breath. "However, having spent last evening in conversation with you, I find myself reconsidering my position. How remarkably inconsistent of you." The sharpness of her tone made him wince. "You misunderstand. I am not reconsidering because I have decided to accept an arranged marriage. I am reconsidering because I would like the opportunity to know you properly, without the pressure of familial expectation or social obligation, to see if what might develop between us could be built on genuine regard rather than mere suitability." Emmeline was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. "That is a rather pretty speech, Your Grace, but I am not certain I believe you." The words stung, but he could not fault her skepticism. "Then allow me to prove it. Give me the duration of this house party. Let us spend time together, talk as we did last night without any expectation beyond simple acquaintance. At the end of the week, if you still believe I am merely playing at sincerity, I will trouble you no further." "And if I refuse?" Her chin lifted slightly, a challenge in the gesture. "Then I will respect your decision and maintain whatever distance you require." She turned away, moving along the path with measured steps. Frederick followed, maintaining the space between them, his heart beating uncomfortably hard against his ribs. Behind them, Lady Pemberton hummed softly, examining roses with apparent fascination. "Very well," Emmeline said finally, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "We speak honestly, without social pretense. If you disagree with me, say so. If I bore you, admit it. I have no patience for false courtesy." She glanced at him. "And you must accept that my answer at the end of this week may still be no." "Agreed on both counts." They continued walking, and gradually the tension between them eased into something more comfortable. Frederick found himself asking questions he had wondered about since their first meeting, learning that Emmeline had been educated partly by her father, a scholar of modest means who had valued his daughter's intellect, and partly by her own voracious reading. She asked him about his estate management, his views on political reform, his relationship with his late father. The conversations over the following days were remarkable in their depth and candor. They disagreed frequently, sometimes heatedly, but always with mutual respect. Frederick discovered that Emmeline possessed not only intelligence, but also compassion, demonstrated in her discussions of tenant welfare and social responsibility. She in turn seemed surprised by his willingness to acknowledge when her arguments had merit, his capacity to admit uncertainty rather than claiming false authority. On the third evening, during another gathering in the music room, Frederick noticed Emmeline standing alone near the terrace doors, her expression distant. He excused himself from a conversation about hunting and joined her. "You look as though you wish to be anywhere but here," he observed quietly. She startled slightly, then offered a rueful smile. "Is it so obvious?" "Only to someone paying attention." He gestured toward the open doors. "The terrace is empty, if you need air. I could accompany you, with Lady Pemberton's supervision, naturally." They stepped outside into the cool evening, the sounds of conversation and music fading behind them. Emmeline moved to the stone railing, looking out over the darkened gardens. "I do not belong in places like this," she said suddenly. "I know the steps to the dance, can make appropriate conversation, play the pianoforte adequately, But it all feels like performing in a play where everyone else knows their lines perfectly and I am merely approximating. Frederick moved to stand beside her, close enough that he could see her profile in the lamplight spilling from the windows. I understand that feeling more than you might think. She glanced at him skeptically. You are a duke. This is your natural environment. I am a duke who would rather be discussing agricultural yields than making small talk about the weather, who finds most social gatherings tedious beyond measure and tolerates them only because duty demands it. He paused. Who has spent most of his life feeling fundamentally apart from everyone around him, regardless of how seamlessly he appears to fit. Emmeline turned to face him fully, something shifting in her expression. I had not imagined that someone of your position might feel that way. Titles do not make us immune to loneliness, Miss Thorne. They merely provide better masks. The honesty of the statement seemed to surprise them both. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and Frederick felt something pass between them, recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of genuine understanding. Why did you refuse the arranged marriage so emphatically? She asked quietly. The real reason. He could have deflected, could have offered the same principled explanation he had given before. Instead, he found himself speaking the truth he had barely admitted to himself. Because I was afraid. Because I have watched too many marriages of convenience wither into mutual resentment or cold tolerance. Because I convinced myself that remaining alone was preferable to risking something more. He met her eyes. And because I had already met you, and I knew that any arranged union between us would be a lie. Not because I did not want to marry you, but because I wanted it too much to let it be reduced to a transaction. Emmeline's breath caught audibly. Your Grace. Frederick, he interrupted. When we are private, please call me Frederick. Frederick, she repeated, the name strange on her lips. You speak of wanting to marry me, but you barely know me. I know enough to want to know more, to want to discover everything, your thoughts, your dreams, what makes you laugh, what frightens you, what you hope for. He took a half-step closer, though he did not presume to touch her. I know that you are brilliant and brave and entirely yourself, without artifice or pretense, that you challenge me in ways I desperately need, that speaking with you feels like coming home to a place I did not know I had been seeking. She was trembling slightly, her hands gripping the railing. This is madness. We have known each other mere days. Then tell me you feel nothing. Tell me these conversations mean no more to you than any other passing acquaintance, and I will believe you. He waited, his heart in his throat. Tell me, Emmeline, and I will let this go. Her name on his lips seemed to break something in her carefully maintained composure. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, they were bright, with unshed tears. I cannot, she whispered. God help me, I cannot. The admission hung between them, tremulous and honest. Frederick felt something in his chest expand painfully. Fear and hope tangled so completely he could not distinguish one from the other. Then what do we do? He asked. Emmeline drew a shaking breath. I do not know. This was not supposed to happen. I was supposed to refuse you, to return home and continue my life as it was. And now? Now, everything is impossibly complicated. Before Frederick could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Lady Pemberton appeared in the doorway, her expression gentle but firm. My dears, I must insist you return inside. The evening grows late, and proprieties must be observed. They followed her back into the music room, but the rest of the evening passed in a blur for Frederick. He was acutely aware of Emmeline across the room, of the way she avoided his gaze even as he could sense her awareness of him. When the guests finally began retiring for the night, he caught her eye for just a moment, saw the confusion and something else, something that looked remarkably like longing, before she turned away. In his rooms later, Frederick stood at the window, staring out at the darkened grounds, his mind replaying their conversation. He had not intended to be so forthright, to reveal so much of what he had kept carefully hidden, but Emmeline's presence seemed to strip away his usual defenses, leaving him vulnerable in ways that were both terrifying and strangely liberating. He had told her the truth. He wanted to know everything about her, wanted to build something real and lasting, not because duty demanded it, but because his heart insisted upon it. The irony was not lost on him, that he had refused an arranged marriage only to discover he wanted precisely what that arrangement would have given him, if only it could be on different terms. The question now was whether Emmeline felt the same, whether her admission on the terrace had been merely acknowledgement of attraction or something deeper, whether she could see past his title and his mistakes to the man beneath, flawed and uncertain, but entirely sincere in his regard for her. Sleep eluded him for hours, his thoughts circling endlessly. By the time dawn broke over the horizon, Frederick had made a decision. This week at Thornfield Manor would not be enough. He needed more time, needed to prove to Emmeline that his feelings were genuine and enduring, needed to show her that a life together could be built on mutual respect and affection rather than mere obligation. But first, he had to convince her to give him that chance. The morning brought no clarity, only a persistent ache beneath Frederick's ribs that he recognized as equal parts hope and dread. He descended to breakfast determined to seek out Emmeline, to continue the conversation they had begun on the terrace, but she was not among the guests gathered in the dining room. Lady Pemberton, when discreetly questioned, informed him that Miss Thorne had requested a tray in her rooms, citing a headache. Frederick knew evasion when he encountered it. He spent the morning in a state of restless agitation, attempting to engage in the activities Lord Pemberton had arranged, a shooting party that held no interest for him, while his thoughts remained fixed on a woman who was very deliberately avoiding him. By early afternoon his patience had worn thin. He returned to the manor and went directly to the library, the place where they had first truly spoken, hoping she might seek the same refuge. She was there, seated in the same window seat, though this time she was not reading. She simply stared out at the gardens, her profile etched with an expression that spoke of internal turmoil. When he entered, she turned, and he saw wariness flash across her features before she carefully schooled them into neutrality. "Your headache has improved, I trust," he said, making no effort to hide that he knew it had been an excuse. "Frederick," his name came out as something between a warning and a plea. "You should not be here." "Where else would I be?" He moved closer but did not crowd her. "We need to speak about last night." "There is nothing to speak about." She rose from the window seat, creating distance between them. "I said things I should not have said. You said things that cannot be unsaid. It changes nothing." "It changes everything, and you know it." Emmeline turned to face him, and he saw that her composure was more fragile than she wanted him to believe. Her hands trembled slightly before she clasped them together, and her eyes held a kind of desperate determination. "Do not make this more difficult than it already is," she said quietly. "Please." "Difficult for whom? For you because you are afraid of what you feel? Or for me, because I'm supposed to pretend that what exists between us is insignificant?" Frederick took a step closer. "I will not do that, Emmeline, I cannot." "You must." Her voice broke slightly on the words. "You speak of wanting to know me, of building something genuine, but you do not understand what you are asking. I am not the woman you imagine me to be." "Then tell me who you are. Show me what I am missing." She laughed, but the sound held no humor. "I am the daughter of a scholar who died leaving more debts than assets. I am a woman without substantial fortune or influential connections, whose family tolerates her only because refusing to do so would cause scandal. I read philosophy when I should be perfecting needlework. I speak my mind when I should remain silent, and I have no interest in being the ornamental duchess your world expects." She met his eyes. "I would be a terrible wife for someone like you." Frederick listened to this litany with growing understanding. This was not rejection born of indifference but of fear. Fear that she would not measure up to expectations she believed he held, fear that the reality of her circumstances made her unsuitable, fear that accepting what they both felt would lead inevitably to disappointment. "Are you quite finished cataloguing your supposed inadequacies?" he asked mildly. She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "I am being honest with you. No, you are constructing barriers. There is a difference." He closed the remaining distance between them, stopping just short of touching her. You speak as though your lack of fortune matters to me. It does not. You speak as though your intelligence and independent thinking are flaws. They are not. And you speak as though I expect you to transform yourself into some idealized version of what a duchess should be, when what I actually want is exactly who you are right now, brilliant and stubborn and entirely yourself. Emmeline shook her head, though he could see she was fighting against the pull of his words. You say that now. But what happens when society judges me? When I embarrass you with my unconventional opinions or my refusal to play the games your world requires? Then society can go to hell, he said bluntly, surprising himself with the vehemence of the statement. I spent years conforming to expectations that meant nothing to me, performing the role of the perfect duke while feeling utterly hollow inside. I will not go back to that existence, not even for the approval of people whose opinions hold no true value, and I certainly will not ask you to diminish yourself for their comfort. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks, and Frederick felt his heart constrict painfully. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to move away, and when she did not, he gently brushed the tears away with his thumb. I am terrified, she whispered, of this, of you, of what it means. So am I. The admission cost him, but it was the truth she needed to hear. I am terrified that you will wake up one day and realize you settled for someone unworthy of you, that my pride or my past mistakes will drive you away, that I will fail you in some fundamental way. He cupped her face gently in both hands. But I am more terrified of walking away from this, from you, without trying. For a long moment, they stood frozen in that tableau, the world reduced to the space between them and the choice that hung in the balance. Then Emmeline reached up and covered his hands with her own, holding them against her face as though anchoring herself. I do not know how to do this, she said, how to be what you need. You already are. Frederick leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers. Just be yourself. That is all I have ever wanted. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable and terrifying and perfect in its honesty. Frederick felt Emmeline melt against him, her hands sliding up to grip his shoulders as though she might fall without that anchor. He kissed her with all the pent-up longing of 2 years spent thinking of her, all the desperate hope that this fragile, precious thing between them might survive the weight of the world's expectations. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Emmeline looked up at him with wonder and residual fear warring in her expression. What have we done? She asked. Something reckless and entirely right, Frederick replied. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then forced himself to step back before propriety was completely abandoned. Emmeline, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as though suddenly cold. If we were to marry, not as an arranged union but as a genuine choice between equals, would you say yes? The question hung between them, weighted with implications that extended far beyond the simple words. Emmeline was quiet for so long that Frederick felt panic begin to claw at his chest, the fear that he had miscalculated, that she would still refuse him despite everything they had shared. Yes, she finally whispered. God help me, yes. Relief and joy flooded through him in equal measure. Then marry me, not because our families think it suitable, not because society expects it, but because we choose it, because what we have found together is worth fighting for. Your uncle will claim credit for the match, Emmeline pointed out, though there was a hint of humour breaking through her tears. He will believe his arrangement succeeded. Let him think what he wishes. We will know the truth. Frederick took her hands in his, threading their fingers together. Though I should warn you, being married to me will involve a great deal of debate about agricultural policy and long evenings in the library. I am told I can be insufferably stubborn. Then we are well matched. A genuine smile finally broke across her face, transforming her features with sudden radiance. Though I should warn you that I have very strong opinions about tenant education and will insist on being involved in estate management. I would expect nothing less. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles. We should speak with Lord Pemberton, make our intentions known properly. And I should write to your family, request permission to court you formally. Emmeline laughed, the sound light and genuine for the first time since he had entered the library. Such propriety after kissing me without chaperone. Whatever will society say? I imagine they will say a great many things, most of which we will ignore. Frederick felt giddiness rising in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation that took him a moment to identify as pure happiness. Though perhaps we should practice more restraint going forward. I would not want to compromise your reputation before we have the chance to marry. How noble of you. But her eyes sparkled with mischief that made his heart race. Though I suspect restraint will prove challenging. Extremely challenging, he agreed, forcing himself to maintain the distance between them when what he wanted was to pull her close again. Which is why we should return to the others before I forget myself entirely. They made their way back to the main part of the house, where guests were gathering for tea. Lady Pemberton took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Over the following hours, Frederick and Emmeline navigated the social requirements with new ease, secure in the understanding they had reached. He found himself watching her across the room, marveling at how quickly his entire world had shifted on its axis. That evening, Frederick requested a private meeting with Lord Pemberton to formally declare his intentions. His host listened with evident satisfaction, having clearly suspected which way the wind was blowing. "I am pleased," Lord Pemberton said. "Miss Thorne is an exceptional young woman, and you are a fortunate man. Though I confess I wondered if you two would ever stop circling each other like wary cats. We are both stubborn," Frederick admitted, "but I believe that will serve us well in the years ahead." "Undoubtedly. Now, shall we discuss practicalities? You will need to write to Miss Thorne's guardian, secure proper permissions. There is the matter of settlements to be arranged." They spent the next hour working through the logistics, Frederick's mind racing ahead to all that needed to be accomplished. He would not rush Emmeline into marriage, would give her time to adjust to the idea and to plan the wedding she wanted. But neither would he waste time with unnecessary delays. They had already lost 2 years to pride and fear. He had no intention of losing more. The remaining days at Thornfield Manor passed in a haze of carefully chaperoned walks and long conversations that ranged across every subject imaginable. Frederick discovered that Emmeline possessed not only intelligence, but also a wry humour that matched his own, a deep compassion that informed her every opinion, and a quiet strength that he found both humbling and inspiring. She, in turn, seemed surprised by his willingness to be vulnerable, to admit uncertainty and seek her counsel on matters he would never have discussed with anyone else. They disagreed often, sometimes heatedly, but always with underlying respect. Emmeline challenged his assumptions about class and privilege, pushing him to examine beliefs he had never questioned. Frederick offered perspectives shaped by his position and responsibilities, helping her understand the complexities of navigating a world that resisted change. Together, they began to envision what their partnership might look like. Not a conventional marriage, where the husband made decisions and the wife obeyed, but something more radical and equal. On their last evening at Thornfield, they stood again on the terrace where so much had shifted between them. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, and Frederick felt a peace he had not known in years. "Are you certain," Emmeline asked quietly, "about all of this? There is still time to reconsider." Frederick turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life, are you?" She searched his face, then smiled, the soft, genuine smile that still had the power to make his breath catch. "Yes, though I confess the practical realities are beginning to seem rather daunting. There will be so much to plan, so many arrangements to make. We will manage it together." He squeezed her hands gently. "Though I should warn you that my household staff is set in their ways. You may face some resistance to changes you wish to implement. Then I shall charm them mercilessly until they surrender." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "I can be quite persuasive when necessary." "Of that I have no doubt." Frederick pulled her closer, mindful of Lady Pemberton's watchful presence near the doorway. "I find myself impatient for the future, Emmeline, for all the days and years ahead, when you will be my Duchess, my partner, my wife. Your equal," she added firmly. "Always." He kissed her forehead. "In all things." They returned to their respective homes the following day, parting with promises to write frequently and reunite soon. Frederick immediately set about fulfilling the requirements for their engagement, writing to Emmeline's guardian and beginning the process of settling their affairs. Her guardian, an elderly uncle who had viewed her as more burden than blessing, was astonished but swiftly cooperative. Once he understood the advantages of aligning his family with the Duke of Ravenscourt, the formal announcement of their engagement created precisely the sensation Frederick had anticipated. Society was abuzz with speculation about the sudden match, though most assumed it had indeed been arranged by Frederick's uncle. Let them think what they wished. He and Emmeline knew the truth, and that was sufficient. Letters flew between them daily, each one revealing new dimensions of the other's character. Emmeline wrote with passion about the books she was reading, the ideas she was exploring, her growing excitement about the possibilities their marriage represented. Frederick shared details of his estate management, consulted her opinion on decisions affecting his tenants, confessed doubts and concerns he would never have voiced to anyone else. They met again 6 weeks later in London, where Frederick had taken a house for the season. Properly chaperoned by Emmeline's aunt, they attended social events together, learning to navigate society as a couple. Frederick took private satisfaction in watching skeptics realize that Emmeline was not only beautiful, but brilliant, that her unconventional nature stemmed not from ignorance, but from thoughtful conviction. There were challenges, of course. Some members of society whispered that she was too outspoken, too intellectual, not sufficiently deferential. Frederick made it clear through word and deed that he would tolerate no disrespect toward his future wife, and most people were wise enough to keep their opinions private. Those who were not quickly found themselves excluded from his social circle. Emmeline, for her part, struggled initially with the scrutiny that came with being engaged to a duke. She confessed to Frederick during a quiet moment at a particularly tedious ball that she felt like a specimen under glass, constantly observed and judged. "They are simply curious," he told her, leading her onto the terrace for air. "You are not what they expected, which makes you interesting. Give them time to adjust." "And if they never do?" She looked up at him, vulnerability clear in her expression. "If I remain forever the unsuitable Duchess." Frederick cupped her face in his hands, heedless of who might see. "Then they are fools who have failed to recognize your worth. But you will never be unsuitable, Emmeline. Not to me, not to the people whose opinions actually matter." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty. "I love you," she said, the words carrying the weight of revelation. "I did not intend to, did not want to, but I do." His heart felt too large for his chest. "I love you," he replied. "Have loved you since that first meeting, though I was too proud and too afraid to acknowledge it." They stood together in the shadows, holding each other while music drifted from the ballroom, and Frederick felt the last of his defenses crumble away. This woman, brilliant and brave and entirely herself, had somehow seen past every barrier he had constructed and claimed his heart completely. The terrifying part was how right it felt, how inevitable, as though all his life had been leading to this moment. The weeks leading to their wedding were a flurry of activity. Emmeline insisted on being involved in every decision, from the guest list to the flowers to the specific wording of their vows. Some found her attention to detail excessive, but Frederick understood it for what it was. Her need to make this marriage truly theirs, shaped by their shared values rather than imposed by tradition. They had long discussions about what their life together would look like. Emmeline made clear that she expected to be consulted on estate matters, that she intended to implement educational programs for tenant children, that she would not be relegated to managing household affairs while Frederick made all substantive decisions. Some of his advisers cautioned him against allowing his wife such latitude, but Frederick ignored them. He had chosen Emmeline precisely because she would be a true partner, and he had no intention of betraying that promise. 3 months after their engagement, they married in a ceremony that was both traditional and subtly revolutionary. Emmeline walked down the aisle with her head high, meeting Frederick's eyes with a mixture of joy and determination that made his heart swell. When they exchanged vows, she spoke hers clearly and firmly, adding a phrase they had composed together about partnership and mutual respect. A few guests murmured in surprise, but Frederick felt only pride. The wedding breakfast was elegant, but not ostentatious. attended by those who genuinely supported their union rather than those whose presence was merely obligatory. Frederick's uncle took credit for the match, as Emmeline had predicted, but Frederick found he could not bring himself to care. Let the old man have his triumph. It cost nothing and harmed no one. That night, in the privacy of their rooms, Emmeline confessed to nervousness about the physical aspects of marriage. Frederick, who had his own concerns about being gentle enough, patient enough, worthy enough, took her hands and promised they would navigate this together as they had everything else. What followed was tender and honest, marked by mutual care and growing confidence. Frederick discovered that Emmeline approached intimacy with the same fearless curiosity she brought to everything else, and her trust in him was both humbling and deeply arousing. Afterward, holding her as she drowsed against his chest, he felt a contentment he had not known was possible. "I was right to be terrified," Emmeline murmured sleepily. Frederick tensed. "Have I hurt you? If I was too—" "No." She raised her head to look at him, and her eyes held warmth that made his breath catch. "I was right to be terrified because this is so much more than I imagined. The depth of what I feel for you, the completeness of this union. It undoes me, Frederick." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Then we are both undone, and I find I do not mind in the slightest." They spent their first weeks as husband and wife at Ravenscourt, Frederick's ancestral estate. Emmeline threw herself into learning every aspect of the household and lands, asking questions that sometimes stumped even the steward who had served the family for decades. She walked the tenant farms, spoke with workers about their needs and concerns, and began developing the educational programs she had envisioned. Not everyone welcomed her involvement. Some of the older staff members, particularly the housekeeper, resisted changes to long-established routines. Frederick watched his wife navigate these challenges with a combination of firmness and diplomacy, never backing down from her convictions, but always listening to genuine concerns. Gradually, resistance gave way to respect, as people realized that Emmeline's reforms were thoughtful and practical, designed to improve lives rather than merely assert authority. Frederick found himself consulting Emmeline on matters he would once have decided alone. Her perspectives, shaped by different experiences and concerns, invariably improved his thinking. When he struggled with a dispute between tenant farmers over water rights, Emmeline suggested a solution that satisfied both parties. When he debated whether to invest in new agricultural equipment, she helped him analyze the long-term economic implications. Their evening conversations ranged across politics, philosophy, estate management, and 1,000 other topics, each discussion deepening his respect for her mind and his gratitude for her partnership. 6 months into their marriage, Emmeline discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Frederick with joy and terror in equal measure. He became almost comically protective, hovering until Emmeline finally informed him that she was carrying a child, not made of glass, and would continue her usual activities unless her physician advised otherwise. "I will not spend 9 months confined to a settee," she declared. "I have work to do." "But what if—" Frederick began, then stopped at the look she gave him. "You are right. Forgive me. I am being absurd. You are being sweet." She softened, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat belly. "But I need you to trust that I know my own limits. I will be careful. I promise. But I will not be an invalid." He learned to balance his protective instincts with respect for her autonomy, a lesson that served them well throughout the pregnancy. Emmeline continued working on her educational programs, though she did make concessions to fatigue as her belly grew. Frederick attended to her with devotion that made the household staff smile, fetching books she wanted, rubbing her swollen feet, holding her when pregnancy made her unexpectedly emotional. Their daughter was born on a spring morning when the gardens were in full bloom. Frederick, who had been pacing the corridor outside Emmeline's rooms for hours, was admitted to find his wife pale and exhausted, but radiating triumph, holding a tiny bundle against her chest. "Meet Lady Catherine," she said, her voice hoarse from labor. "Our daughter." Frederick approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at the impossibly small face, the delicate features that somehow combined elements of both parents. Something cracked open in his chest, a well of feeling so deep he could not begin to articulate it. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She is ours." Emmeline looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." "For what?" "For choosing me. For fighting for us. For this." She gestured with her free hand at the room, the baby, the life they had built together. "For everything." Frederick knelt beside the bed, gathering both wife and daughter into his arms as carefully as he could. "Thank you for allowing me in, for seeing past my mistakes and my pride to what lay beneath, for making me better than I ever thought I could be." They remained like that for a long moment, a new family bound by love that had been hard-won and was therefore all the more precious. Catherine began to fuss, and Emmeline laughed through her tears, adjusting the baby with practiced ease despite being a new mother. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. There were difficult moments when Frederick's pride clashed with Emmeline's independence, when disagreements threatened to become true conflicts. But they had learned to communicate with honesty, to admit mistakes, to choose partnership over winning arguments. Their love, built on respect and genuine regard, proved resilient enough to weather storms that might have destroyed a union founded on less solid ground. 2 more children followed Catherine, a son named Thomas and another daughter they called Margaret. The Ravenscourt nursery rang with laughter and occasional tears, filled with children who were being raised to think for themselves, to question assumptions, to value knowledge and compassion in equal measure. Emmeline's educational programs flourished, expanding to include not just tenant children, but workers' families throughout the region. She wrote papers on social reform that were published in journals, causing some society matrons to sniff about duchesses who should know their place, but earning respect from reformers and intellectuals. Frederick supported every endeavour, proud beyond measure of his remarkable wife. They grew older together, their love deepening with time and shared experience. The initial intensity of passion mellowed into something richer, an abiding affection, complete trust and partnership that had been forged through years of choosing each other daily. Frederick never regretted his refusal of that first arranged marriage because it had forced them both to examine what they truly wanted. And when they chose each other freely, without obligation, they had created something far more valuable than any convenient alliance could have provided. On their 10th anniversary, Emmeline found Frederick in the library reading by lamplight. She settled beside him on the settee, and he automatically adjusted to accommodate her, his arm coming around her shoulders in a gesture so familiar it required no thought. "I was thinking about the day we met," she said. "That garden party where we argued about agricultural reform." Frederick smiled at the memory. "I was insufferable." "Completely." She tilted her head up to look at him. "But I could not stop thinking about you afterward. You challenged me, frustrated me, intrigued me. I told myself I was simply annoyed by your arrogance, but it was more than that even then." "I thought of you constantly," Frederick admitted. "Convinced myself it was merely intellectual admiration, that I appreciated a worthy opponent. It took our forced proximity at Thornfield to make me confront the truth." "Which was?" "That I had been half in love with you from that first meeting, and falling deeper with every moment we spent together." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That you were everything I had not known I was searching for. Brilliant, brave, entirely yourself. That you saw me, truly saw me, and somehow loved me anyway." Emmeline's eyes glistened. "You gave me the courage to be myself without apology. Showed me that partnership could mean true equality, that love did not require diminishing who I was. You chose me when I had given you every reason to walk away, and you have chosen me every day since." "As you have chosen me," Frederick replied. "My stubborn, remarkable duchess, my equal, my love, my—" They sat together in companionable silence, watching the fire burn low, secure in the knowledge that they had built something rare and precious. A marriage not of convenience, but of genuine partnership, grounded in respect and sustained by love that had been tested and proven true. The arranged marriage they had both refused had paradoxically led them to each other, but it was their conscious choice, made freely and renewed daily, that had created the life they now shared. And as Frederick looked at his wife, still brilliant and brave and entirely herself after 10 years together, he felt only gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, and anticipation for all the years yet to come. The passing years brought changes to Ravenscourt that reflected the evolution of its Duke and Duchess. Where once the estate had operated under rigid tradition, it now hummed with innovation tempered by wisdom. Frederick found himself consulting Emmeline on virtually every significant decision, not from obligation, but because her insights invariably improved outcomes. What had begun as an unconventional partnership had become the foundation upon which their entire household functioned. Their children grew into remarkable individuals, each shaped by parents who valued independent thought over blind obedience. Catherine, now 14, possessed her mother's fierce intelligence and her father's strategic mind. She spent hours in the library devouring books on history and political philosophy, engaging her parents in debates that sometimes left Frederick laughing at how thoroughly his daughter could dismantle his arguments. Thomas, at 11, showed an unexpected aptitude for agriculture and spent his days shadowing the estate steward, asking endless questions about crop rotation and soil management. Little Margaret, just 8, combined her mother's compassion with an artistic temperament that expressed itself in paintings that captured the beauty of Ravenscourt with startling maturity. Frederick watched his children with pride that bordered on awe. They were being raised so differently from how he had been, encouraged to question, to explore, to develop their own convictions rather than simply accept what they were told. Emmeline insisted on this approach, despite criticism from some members of society who felt the Duke's children should be schooled in more traditional discipline. They will inherit privilege, Emmeline had argued years ago when they first discussed their philosophy of child rearing. The least we can do is ensure they understand the responsibility that comes with it. They must learn to think critically, to empathize with those less fortunate, to use their advantages in service of something larger than themselves. Frederick had agreed wholeheartedly, and now, seeing the results of that approach, he felt vindicated. His children were not perfect. Catherine could be stubborn to the point of intractability. Thomas sometimes lacked confidence despite his abilities, and Margaret's sensitivity meant she felt others' pain almost too keenly. But they were good, thinking, compassionate individuals who would make their mark on the world in meaningful ways. The educational programs Emmeline had established continued to expand. What had begun as a modest effort to teach tenant children to read had evolved into a comprehensive system that included not only basic literacy, but also practical skills that would improve their prospects. The schoolhouse Emmeline had built near the village now educated nearly 50 children, staffed by teachers she had personally selected and trained. Frederick often accompanied his wife on her visits to the school, watching her engage with students who regarded her with a mixture of awe and genuine affection. She remembered every child's name, knew their family circumstances, celebrated their achievements, and gently pushed them to reach beyond what they thought possible. Some of the boys and girls she had first taught years ago were now young adults, several of whom had gone on to positions of responsibility that would have been unthinkable without the education she had provided. One particular student had captured both their attention. Young James, the son of a tenant farmer, possessed a mathematical mind that astounded even the most experienced teachers. Emmeline had recognized his exceptional abilities early and worked tirelessly to nurture them, providing advanced texts and arranging for a Cambridge scholar to assess his potential. The scholar's report had been unequivocal. James was a prodigy who deserved every opportunity to develop his gifts. The question of what to do with such talent had sparked lengthy discussions between Frederick and Emmeline. Sending a tenant farmer's son to university was unprecedented in their region, and would certainly raise eyebrows among peers who believed education should remain within appropriate class boundaries. But to deny James that opportunity solely because of his birth would betray everything they had worked to build. "We must sponsor him," Emmeline had said with characteristic determination. "Arrange for his admission to Cambridge. Provide the financial support necessary for him to focus on his studies without worrying about his family's welfare." Frederick had needed no convincing. They established a scholarship in James's name, though the true beneficiary was obvious to everyone involved. When James departed for university that autumn, his gratitude was so profound it brought tears to Emmeline's eyes. His father, a weathered man who had spent his life working the land, could barely speak as he thanked the Duke and Duchess for giving his son a future he had never dared imagine. "This is what it means," Frederick told Emmeline that evening as they reflected on the day. "This is the legacy that matters, not the lands or the title, but lives transformed because we recognized potential and refused to let circumstance define destiny." "You have changed lives," Frederick told her one afternoon as they walked back from the school. "Given people opportunities they never would have had otherwise." Emmeline shook her head. "I have simply removed obstacles. They changed their own lives through hard work and determination." She paused, looking back at the schoolhouse with satisfaction. "But yes, I am proud of what we have accomplished here." "As you should be." Frederick took her hand, threading their fingers together in a gesture that had become habitual over 15 years of marriage. "Though I suspect you are already planning the next expansion." She smiled, that particular expression that meant he had read her correctly. "There are 3 more villages within reasonable distance. If we could establish similar schools there, coordinate the curriculum, perhaps even create pathways for the most talented students to pursue further education. Tell me what you need and we will make it happen." Frederick squeezed her hand. "Your vision has always exceeded my own, and following where you lead has never steered us wrong." They continued walking, comfortable in the silence that came from years of deep companionship. Frederick marveled, not for the first time, at how thoroughly Emmeline had transformed not just his estate, but his entire understanding of what nobility should mean. She had taught him that privilege carried obligation, that power should be used to elevate others, rather than simply maintain one's own position, that true legacy was measured not in lands or titles, but in lives improved and potential realized. These lessons informed every decision Frederick made. When Parliament debated reforms to labour laws, he spoke passionately in favour of protections for workers, earning him disapproval from peers who felt he was betraying his class. When local magistrates wanted to impose harsh penalties on poachers driven by desperation, he advocated for understanding underlying causes and addressing poverty rather than simply punishing its symptoms. His positions made him controversial in some circles, but he found he cared less about the approval of people whose values he did not share. The political battles took their toll, however. There were evenings when Frederick returned from London exhausted and frustrated, having spent hours arguing with men whose worldviews seemed calcified beyond any hope of change. Emmeline would draw him a bath, pour him brandy, and listen as he vented his frustrations. Then she would remind him of the progress they had made, the minds they had changed, the incremental victories that accumulated over time into meaningful reform. "Change is slow," she would say, her hand on his shoulder offering comfort and strength. "But it is happening. Every speech you give plants seeds, even in the most resistant soil. Some will never germinate, but others will take root when circumstances shift. You must have patience, my love, and trust that your words matter." Her faith sustained him through the most difficult moments, giving him courage to continue speaking truth even when it seemed futile. And gradually, he noticed shifts. Younger lords who had heard his arguments and begun questioning their own assumptions, reformers who cited his speeches in their publications, tenant families who looked at him with gratitude rather than mere deference because they knew he fought for their interests, even when it cost him socially. "You have made me radical," he teased Emmeline one evening, as they reviewed correspondence about his latest parliamentary speech, which had generated both praise and condemnation. "I have simply helped you recognize what you already believed," she countered. "You were never as conservative as you pretended to be. You simply needed permission to acknowledge it. Permission you granted liberally and without hesitation." Frederick pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Along with everything else you have given me." Emmeline relaxed against him, and they stood together in the gathering dusk, watching through the window as their children played in the garden below. Catherine was explaining something to her younger siblings with characteristic intensity, while Thomas listened attentively, and Margaret picked flowers with distracted concentration. "They are extraordinary," Emmeline murmured. "All 3 of them. They take after their mother and their father." She turned in his arms to face him. "Frederick, I need to tell you something." The seriousness of her tone made him tense slightly. "What is it?" "I have been approached by a publisher. They want me to compile my papers on social reform into a book." She searched his face. It would be controversial. Some will say I am overstepping, that a duchess should not be publishing scholarly work on such topics. It could reflect poorly on you. Frederick considered this for perhaps 3 seconds before responding. Will it be a good book? Will it advance important ideas? I believe so, yes. Then publish it. Anyone who objects can answer to me. He cupped her face in his hands. Emmeline, you have spent 15 years supporting my work, raising our children, managing our household, all while pursuing your own initiatives with remarkable success. If you wish to write a book that will contribute to meaningful discourse, I will support you absolutely. Relief flooded her expression, followed by something deeper, gratitude mixed with love so profound it made his chest ache. Thank you. I know it will cause talk, but let them talk. Your voice deserves to be heard. Your ideas deserve a wider audience. He kissed her forehead. Though I confess, I am selfishly pleased that you will be occupied with writing. Perhaps it will keep you from scheming up additional projects that require my participation in tedious committee meetings. She laughed, the sound bright and genuine. I make no such promises. In fact, I have been thinking about establishing a lending library for the working families in the region. Frederick groaned theatrically, even as his heart swelled with affection. This was his wife, endlessly creative, perpetually planning, never satisfied with the status quo when improvement was possible. She challenged him, inspired him, occasionally exhausted him, and made his life infinitely richer than it would have been without her. The months Emmeline spent writing were perhaps the most intellectually stimulating period of their marriage. She would work in the library for hours each day, surrounded by reference materials and half-finished drafts, emerging periodically to test arguments on Frederick or seek his perspective on particular points. He found himself drawn into the project, offering insights from his political experience and challenging assertions that needed stronger evidence. Their dinner conversations during this period ranged across economics, philosophy, history, and social theory. Catherine often joined these discussions, her young mind grappling with complex ideas, while her parents debated nuances. Frederick recognized in his daughter the same intellectual hunger that had first attracted him to Emmeline, and he felt a fierce pride watching the two women he loved most engage in spirited discourse. The book, when it was published 18 months later, created precisely the sensation Emmeline had anticipated. Titled Social Obligation and Noble Responsibility, a Practical Framework for Reform, it presented carefully researched arguments for why the privileged classes had both moral and practical reasons to invest in improving conditions for workers and tenant farmers. Emmeline wrote with clarity and conviction, backing every assertion with data from her own programs and citing examples from progressive estates across England and the continent. Critics were swift and harsh. Several prominent lords denounced the work as dangerous radicalism that would undermine social order. Anonymous pamphlets circulated, questioning whether the Duchess of Ravenscourt had overstepped acceptable bounds for a woman of her station. Some of Frederick's oldest acquaintances pointedly avoided him at social gatherings, making their disapproval clear. But there was also praise, and from quarters that mattered more. Reformers hailed the book as a breakthrough, thrilled to have a duchess lending her voice and credibility to their cause. Several other noble families quietly reached out to Emmeline, asking for advice on implementing similar programs on their own estates. Working families who had benefited from her educational initiatives viewed her with something approaching reverence. Frederick weathered the controversy with the same steadfast support he had promised. When peers confronted him about his wife's unsuitable activities, he responded with icy politeness that made clear the subject was not open for discussion. When an elderly duke suggested pointedly that Frederick should manage his household better, Frederick's reply was so cutting that the man retreated in mortified silence and never raised the topic again. "You are making enemies," Emmeline observed after one particularly tense social event, where several people had snubbed them conspicuously. "I am clarifying who my true friends are," Frederick corrected. "Anyone who cannot accept that my wife is brilliant and accomplished and deserves to contribute meaningfully to public discourse is not someone whose friendship I value." He took her hand. "Besides, we have always known we were unconventional. Why start conforming now? Their children, watching their parents navigate controversy with united dignity, learned powerful lessons about standing firm in one's convictions, even when facing criticism. Catherine, in particular, absorbed these lessons eagerly, already showing signs of the formidable social reformer she would one day become. As the years continued to unfold, Frederick and Emmeline found their partnership deepening in ways they had not anticipated. The passion of early marriage had not diminished, but had been enriched by profound friendship, absolute trust, and the shared satisfaction of building something meaningful together. They could communicate with glances across crowded rooms, finish each other's thoughts in private conversations, anticipate needs before they were voiced. There were still disagreements, sometimes heated ones. Emmeline's tendency to take on too many projects occasionally led to exhaustion that worried Frederick. His protectiveness sometimes veered into controlling behavior that sparked her temper. They had learned through trial and error how to fight fairly, to voice frustrations honestly without attacking character, to listen even when angry, to apologize when wrong and forgive when hurt. One particular argument stood out in Frederick's memory, occurring during a period when Emmeline had pushed herself too hard, accepting speaking engagements across the country while simultaneously managing multiple educational initiatives and writing articles for reform journals. She had collapsed from exhaustion, frightening everyone, and Frederick's fear had manifested as anger that she had been so reckless with her health. "You cannot continue like this," he had said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "You are one person, Emmeline, not an army. You must learn to delegate, to say no, to recognize your own limitations." "Do not presume to tell me my limitations," she had snapped back, her own fear expressing itself as defensive anger. "I know what I can handle." "Clearly you do not, or you would not be confined to bed on doctor's orders." Frederick had immediately regretted the harshness of his tone, but pride prevented him from backing down. "I will not watch you destroy yourself in pursuit of perfection." The fight had escalated from there, both of them saying things they did not mean, until finally Emmeline had started crying, great wrenching sobs that broke through Frederick's anger like a dam bursting. He had gathered her into his arms, holding her as she wept out her frustrations and fears. "I am afraid of failing," she had confessed through her tears. "Afraid that if I slow down, if I do less, all the progress we have made will slip away, that people will forget why this work matters." "The work will continue because it is built on solid foundations," Frederick had assured her. "Because you have trained others, inspired others, created systems that will outlast any individual effort. But none of it means anything if you sacrifice your health, your happiness, your life in the process." He had tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "I need you, Emmeline. Our children need you. Please, my love, learn to be kinder to yourself." That conversation had marked a turning point. Emmeline had begun delegating more, training protégés who could carry on aspects of her work, learning to prioritize quality over quantity. And Frederick had learned to express his fears more constructively, to offer support rather than criticism when she struggled. Their 20th anniversary arrived on a perfect summer day. Frederick had planned a quiet celebration, just the two of them, while their children stayed with cousins for the weekend. He arranged a picnic in the spot where he had first told Emmeline he loved her, the terrace at Thornfield Manor, which Lord and Lady Pemberton had graciously made available. They sat on a blanket as the sun set, picking at cold chicken and fresh strawberries, talking about everything and nothing in the comfortable way of long-married couples. Emmeline had gone quiet, her expression thoughtful, as she watched the play of light across the gardens. "What are you thinking?" Frederick asked, recognizing that particular look. "About how thoroughly you have exceeded every hope I held for marriage," she said softly. "When I first refused the arranged match, I was so certain I knew what I wanted. Independence, respect for my intellect, space to pursue my own interests. And you have given me all of that, and so much more. As you have given me more than I knew to ask for." Frederick set aside his plate and moved closer. "You transformed me, Emmeline, made me question assumptions I had never examined, challenged me to be better than I thought possible, showed me what true partnership looks like. Every good thing in my life traces back to you." She turned to face him fully, and he saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We have built something rare, haven't we? Something that transcends what either of us could have created alone." "We have built a life of meaning," Frederick agreed, "raised remarkable children, created programs that have genuinely improved lives, challenged each other to grow while never losing sight of what matters most." He took both her hands in his. "And we have loved each other through it all, not with the easy affection of a comfortable union, but with fierce devotion that has weathered storms and emerged stronger." "I would choose you again," Emmeline whispered. "Every time, without hesitation. Even knowing all the challenges we have faced, all the mistakes we have made, all the ways we have hurt and frustrated each other, I would choose you. As I would choose you. Always." Frederick pulled her close, and they sat wrapped in each other's arms as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead. The years that followed brought the joys and sorrows inherent in any long life. Frederick's uncle passed away, the old man dying satisfied that his arranged marriage scheme had succeeded, never knowing the full truth of how Frederick and Emmeline had actually come together. Emmeline's aunt, who had served as their first chaperone, died peacefully in her sleep, leaving behind grateful memories of the couple she had helped bring together. Catherine made her debut in society and promptly horrified traditionalists by announcing her intention to attend university lectures rather than focus solely on securing an advantageous marriage. Frederick supported her ambitions completely, though he did insist she maintain enough social presence to avoid complete scandal. Thomas, having developed into an agricultural innovator, began implementing experimental farming techniques on portions of the Ravenscourt estate with remarkable success. Margaret married a kind man who appreciated her artistic sensibilities and encouraged her painting, establishing herself as a respected portraitist. Watching their children forge their own paths, Frederick felt profound satisfaction. They had raised independent thinkers who would contribute meaningfully to the world, who understood both privilege and responsibility, who would carry forward the values he and Emmeline had worked so hard to instill. As Frederick and Emmeline moved into their 50s, they began to step back slightly from the most demanding aspects of estate management, entrusting more responsibility to Thomas and the capable stewards they had trained. This freed time for pursuits they had sometimes neglected in busier years. They traveled together, visiting the continent and exploring places they had read about but never seen. They spent long afternoons in the library, reading companionably or engaged in the debates that still sparked between them. The physical passion that had always characterized their marriage remained, though it had evolved into something less urgent, but no less profound. A physical language of affection and desire, refined by decades of learning each other completely. Frederick still felt his breath catch when Emmeline smiled at him across a room, still felt privileged beyond measure when she came to him in the night, still marveled that this extraordinary woman had chosen to share her life with him. On a crisp autumn morning in their 28th year of marriage, Frederick woke to find Emmeline already awake beside him, watching him with an expression of such tenderness it made his heart stutter. "Good morning," he murmured, reaching for her. "Good morning." She came willingly into his arms, settling against his chest with the ease of long practice. "I was just thinking how grateful I am." "For what, specifically? You have many blessings to choose from." His tone was teasing, but his hand stroked her hair with reverent gentleness. "For this, for us, for every choice that led us here." She tilted her head back to look at him. "Do you remember how terrified we both were at the beginning? How certain I was that I would fail as a duchess? How afraid you were that I would realize you were unworthy?" "I remember thinking we were both mad to attempt it," Frederick admitted. "Two stubborn people with no model for the kind of partnership we wanted to create, trying to forge something new against considerable resistance. And yet we succeeded." Emmeline's smile was radiant. "Not perfectly. We have made our share of mistakes. But we built a marriage of true equality, raised children who will make the world better, created change that will outlast us. We did that together, Frederick. As partners, as equals, as lovers and friends." He kissed her then, pouring into the gesture everything he felt and could not adequately express. Gratitude, love, devotion, the bone-deep contentment of a life well lived with the right person. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. "I love you," Frederick said simply. "I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for however many more we are granted." "And I love you." Emmeline cupped his face in her hands. "My stubborn, remarkable Duke. My equal. My heart." They remained in bed longer than was strictly proper, holding each other and talking about their plans for the day, the week, the years ahead. There were grandchildren now. Catherine had recently given birth to a daughter, and the joy of watching a new generation begin their journey. There were still programs to oversee, reforms to champion, books to read and debates to have. But underneath all the activity and purpose there was this: two people who had found each other against odds, who had chosen to build something meaningful together, who had loved through challenges and changes, and emerged with a bond that had only strengthened with time. As morning light filled their room, Frederick reflected on the arranged marriage he had refused so emphatically all those years ago. His initial rejection had been born of pride and principle, a determination not to be forced into a union he did not choose. But that very refusal had created the space for something far more valuable, a marriage entered into freely, sustained by genuine partnership, enriched by love that was chosen daily rather than imposed by obligation. He had told Emmeline once that the love most worth having was the kind that survived pride, flourished in truth, and was built through conscious choice. Looking at his wife now, still brilliant and brave and entirely herself after nearly 3 decades together, he knew he had been right. Their story was not a fairy tale where everything came easily. It was better than that. A real story about two imperfect people who had worked, struggled, grown, and ultimately created something extraordinary together. A partnership that had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs. A love that had been tested repeatedly and always proven true. As they finally rose to face the day, Frederick felt at peace with the path his life had taken. The arranged marriage he had refused had paradoxically led him to the woman he had secretly loved, and their determination to forge their own path had created a legacy far richer than any convenient alliance could have provided. They had built a marriage not merely noble in title, but profound in essence, exactly what they had hoped for on that terrace so many years ago when they had finally admitted what they felt for each other. And in doing so, they had proven that the strongest foundations are built not on obligation but on choice, not on duty but on devotion, freely given and gratefully received. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. James, the young man they had sponsored at Cambridge, returned to Ravenscourt accompanied by a distinguished professor who wished to meet the Duke and Duchess personally. James had excelled beyond all expectations, earning recognition for mathematical theories that promised to advance understanding in multiple fields. But more than his academic achievements, what struck Frederick was the young man's character. Humble despite his brilliance, grateful without being servile, passionate about using his education to benefit others. "Your Graces," James said, his voice thick with emotion, "I come to thank you not merely for the opportunity you provided, but for showing me what nobility truly means. You taught me that greatness is measured not by birthright, but by how we lift others. That is a lesson worth more than any degree." Emmeline embraced him warmly, pride evident in her expression. "You have honored everything we hoped for you, James. Your success is your own, earned through dedication and brilliant work. But knowing that our faith in you was justified brings us joy beyond measure." After James and his professor departed, Frederick and Emmeline stood together in the library, the space where so much of their story had unfolded. The afternoon sun slanted through windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. Frederick pulled his wife close, breathing in the scent of lavender that still clung to her hair after all these years. "This is what endures," he said quietly. "Not titles or lands, but lives touched, potential realized, love that transforms both giver and receiver. We have built something that will echo through generations, my darling. Something that began with two stubborn people, who refused to accept what others chose for them and instead chose each other." Emmeline looked up at him, her eyes shining, "and would choose each other still, every day, for all the days to come." Dear listeners, Thank you for journeying with us through Frederick and Emmeline's remarkable love story. If this tale of partnership, growth, and enduring devotion touched your heart, we would be honored if you would subscribe to Echoes of Romance. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. We love hearing how these stories resonate with you. Don't forget to give us a like and activate notifications so you never miss the beautiful, emotionally rich period romances we share each week. Your support means the world to us, and we cannot wait to bring you more stories of love that transcends time. Until next time, may you find your own partnership built on respect, passion, and the courage to choose each other every single day.